56 chairs had been arranged for the funeral. 56. I tallied them as everyone else wept. Karina had insisted on the silver-trimmed folding ones, believing they photographed better. Yet only 55 were occupied. The one beside her, specifically reserved for me, remained empty. She had instructed the usher not to seat me there, claiming it would complicate matters. Complicated? As if mourning your father while surreptitiously texting your attorney about divorce filings wasn't already a tangled mess. I stood at the very back, neither by her side nor among the family, not even with the more distant cousins. I positioned myself near a fuse tree and a woman who in the 90s had once dated her uncle. In my hand, I held a funeral program where my surname was misspelled. Nobody offered me a tissue. When she rose to speak about her father, Glen Darby, the oil magnate, the very man who once remarked that I smelled of drywall, she utterly neglected to acknowledge my presence. Not a solitary mention, neither among the surviving family listed, nor in her expressions of gratitude. Not even a fleeting sidelong glance. She was clad in black silk, her high heels sharp enough to pierce any inflated sense of self-importance. Her tears flowed just perfectly, conveying a semblance of humanity without disturbing her mascara. Upon returning to her seat, she leaned close and murmured something to the man occupying the place meant for me. He chuckled. I had no idea who he was, nor did I care, because what transpired after the ceremony was where the real narrative truly commenced. It wasn't about the inheritance. Not yet. It was Karina's actions as we departed. She intentionally let her handkerchief fall directly before me. Like an imbecile, I stooped to retrieve it, and that's when my gaze caught it. The corner of a folded document tucked into her clutch bag. My name, prominently displayed in bold type next to a case number, was visible. A harsh truth dawned on me then. She had initiated the divorce proceedings before the funeral, before the floral tributes, before the eulogy, before she shed tears for a man who despised me, all while feigning affection. Merely 2 days hence, she was set to inherit $250 million. And 2 days following that, she would enter our residence, present me with a simple white envelope, and declare, "Wendell, I'm choosing myself." But the will? The will held unexpected designs, plans that Karina had entirely failed to foresee. These were provisions that rendered her ashen in a chamber filled with mahogany furnishings and legalistic pronouncements. Provisions that, for the first time in many years, imbued me with significance. The night preceding the reading, I couldn't sleep a wink, not for a single minute. Stretched out on the pull-out sofa in my cousin's basement, I listened to the rhythmic clanking and humming of the pipes, contemplating whether my attendance was even worthwhile. What would be the purpose? Karina had already stripped me of everything, not merely the marriage, but also the self-respect I once possessed when standing by her side. When one is abandoned by a spouse, even before the flowers on her father's tomb have faded, one ceases to anticipate justice from the world. Yet that document, that solitary glimpse of bold lettering bearing my name, beckoned to me insistently, like a hangnail one cannot resist picking. Why would Glen Darby, who habitually called me the lawn ornament, involve me in any affairs of his? The estate, situated on a secluded rise in Hampton Chase, was encircled by wrought iron gates and hushed rumors. The sort of locale where even the air itself carried the scent of opulence. Unlike the other attendees, I was not ushered through the main entrance. Instead, I was directed to a secondary door, typically designated for service staff and caterers, a gesture Glen likely found quite fitting. A small assembly had convened within the study. Deep, rich leather armchairs, animal trophies mounted on the walls, and a towering grandfather clock that had likely chimed through 3 global conflicts. Karina was already present, seated with her legs elegantly crossed, attired in slate gray, no longer in black, signifying the end of the mourning period. Her gaze met mine, devoid of anger or even compassion, only an empty, businesslike tranquility, as if I were merely an acquaintance with whom she'd once shared a car lease. Beside her sat the identical man from the funeral service. His shoes immediately caught my attention, gleaming loafers adorned with small gold embellishments. Footwear of that kind is only worn by those who anticipate being scrutinized. I settled into a chair in the distant corner, a spot where the window's light scarcely penetrated. I was met with silence. Not even the attorney, who clutched a weighty buff folder as if it contained world-altering information, offered a greeting. He cleared his throat and commenced, identifying himself as the appointed executor for the late Mr. Glen Darby. "I shall now read his final instructions," he stated, attested, authenticated, and formally documented 2 months prior to his demise. That 2-month time frame struck me with an unexpected force. Glen had revised his testament quite recently, just before his fatal cardiac event following his final family getaway. I recalled Karina embarking on that journey solo. "You'd be bored anyway," she'd told me, haphazardly tossing sunblock into her bag. I accepted her words then, but doubt gnawed at me now. The lawyer began itemizing holdings: real estate in Rhode Island, an apartment in Paris, a trio of automobiles exceeding the value of my childhood residence, artworks by artists whose names I couldn't even articulate. Every entry in that paper seemed to describe a stranger's idyllic existence. Then came the allocation designated for my daughter, Karina Elise Darby. She gave a subtle nod. Much like royalty expecting its regalia, a bequest of $1 million is to be managed by the family trust, supervised by Mr. Bradley Vaughn. Karina's eyelids fluttered once. The attorney remained impassive. She coughed gently before inquiring, "Did you mean $100 million? A profound stillness descended upon the room, a quiet so heavy it was palpable. The lawyer repositioned his spectacles. "No, $1 million of Mr. Bradley Vaughn. Darby's fortune will be conveyed to a different recipient as detailed within this correspondence." He then unsealed a personally addressed envelope, extracting a 1-page missive. Glen's words reverberated from the written page. "If you're hearing this, Karina, I have probably departed. I've observed your transformation, not gradually over years, but rapidly in mere weeks. You ceased your visits unless a camera was present. You welcomed that individual, whom you presumed I overlooked, into my residence and spoke ill of me. I am not naive. You prized your legacy over your own father, and so my wealth shall not be your recompense." Karina's lips parted marginally, but no utterance, not even a sharp intake of breath, escaped them. The attorney proceeded, his tone devoid of emotion. "To the man who took my daughter as his wife despite fully knowing she would eventually scorn him. To the man who endured my harshness with grace and remained despite all reasons to depart. Wendell Thomas Carr. The rest of my holdings I bequeath to you." In that instant, I felt time shatter. My lungs seemed to cease their function. Karina stared at me as if I'd suddenly developed horns. The man next to her rose abruptly, as if his seat had become perilous. I was speechless. This was not what I desired. All I craved was my marital bond, my feline companion, and the return of my tranquil Sunday dawns. But none of it held relevance now, as I had become the rightful successor to a $250 million fortune. And my estranged wife glared at the ground, as if it had also abandoned her. I exited the chamber before the formalities were complete. I yearned for fresh air. I craved its separation. I felt an overwhelming urge to simultaneously yell, chortle, and expel. She pursued me. I heard the scuff of her heels on the marble flooring, a pace swifter than I'd witnessed from her in ages. "Wendell!" she cried, but I continued my trek down the drive, past the water feature, and through the entrance, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one being left behind. I spent more than 60 minutes walking that day, not due to a lack of transport, nor from a desire for theatrics, but because unless I maintained motion, I feared I might spontaneously combust. The atmosphere grew oppressive. Even the roadside trees along that highway appeared to be inclining, murmuring secrets about me. The fortune held no appeal. I longed for a device to alter the past. I yearned to rewind 6 months and physically jolt myself until I recognized every ignored harbinger. I yearned for a time preceding Karina's immersion in her phone, before her adoption of new fragrances and her dismissive remarks such as, "The world I inhabit is beyond your comprehension." Upon my eventual return to my cousin's residence, I settled onto the edge of the sofa bed. My attire, still the creased shirt from the earlier reading. My gaze fixed on a synthetic plant in the room's corner. My cousin's child was engrossed in a cartoon featuring anthropomorphic animals piloting aircraft. Its sounds were almost imperceptible to me. Glen's voice echoed persistently in my mind. The testament's clause granting that portion to the individual who remained, even when prudence dictated departure. I hadn't realized he had truly seen me, the authentic me. Now he was no more. Sleep eluded me that night as well. However, this time it was not bewilderment, but sheer terror that gripped me. I was wholly unsuited for this. The vast sum, with its unprecedented number of zeros, left me clueless as to its management. My entire existence had revolved around discount vouchers, bulk instant noodles, and meticulously rationing fuel to endure each week. I lacked even the most basic understanding of engaging with legal professionals. How does one handle such immense fortune when, merely days prior, even premium peanut butter was an unaffordable luxury? Yet Karina knew. She possessed a precise understanding of what needed to be done. The following morning, she was already present, waiting outside the depot where I was employed. Indeed, I continued to report for duty. What alternative did I have? She leaned casually against the bonnet of her BMW, as if she hadn't utterly broken my heart and abandoned me without a second thought. The expression in her gaze held no sadness, not even desperation. It was an insatiable hunger, calculated, refined. "We need to converse," she declared, pushing her sunglasses onto her hair with the theatricality of a character in a legal drama. "No, we absolutely do not," I retorted, moving past her. Nevertheless, she pursued me directly into the building, straight past my supervisor. She trapped me by the break room, standing so near, that the familiar scent of the vanilla lotion she wore, when we shared a bed, wafted over me. For a brief instant, everything nearly faded from my mind. I almost recall the sensation of waking beside her and believing I desired something specific. Then she uttered it. "You are undeserving of this, Wendell." No remorse, no contrition, just that blunt statement. I gazed at her, genuinely astounded by her audacity. She blinked, as if I were the one being irrational. "Do you truly believe this fortune is yours?" she pressed on, dropping her voice to a whisper. This outcome was not intended. He was merely punishing me. Nothing more. He consistently knew how to manipulate circumstances. You are merely a representation, Wendell. This has no bearing on you. I let out a laugh, not due to amusement, but as a desperate attempt to quell the tremor in my hands. "A mere symbol?" I questioned. "So I don't even register as an actual human being in your perception?" She folded her arms. "You were an error that persisted excessively." That particular phrase still resonates deep within me. An error that lingered for too long. Prior to my ability to utter a word, before I could even fully absorb the profound sting of her words, she delved into her bag and produced a substantial folder. It contained legal documents, sections marked with highlighter, and post-it notes protruding from the side like an array of angry yellow teeth. "This represents a revised proposition," she stated. "For the distribution, you will squander it. Let's be pragmatic. You'll be utterly devoured." "Is that a veiled menace?" I asked. "It's an offer, Wendell. An opportunity for you to depart with your self-respect intact before you bring dishonor upon us both." She then offered a smile, the identical one she once employed with shop assistants when seeking to circumvent return policies. I did not accept the folder. I was incapable. My hands were clenched tightly into fists at my sides. This was not due to anger. I had not been taught to strike or yell, but rather from profound shame, because a segment of my being conceded her point. A part of me concluded, she is correct. I do not fit into that sphere. Yet another, softer, more wavering voice within me whispered, perhaps I do belong. Perhaps Glen perceived a quality in me that Karina consistently overlooked. Perhaps my persistence, even when it rendered me imperceptible, signified something beyond mere fragility. She pivoted to exit, her heels echoing with self-assurance, the folder still clutched in her hand. "You will contact me," she stated, glancing back over her shoulder. Typically, I would, but on this occasion, I refrained. The reason? I possessed something entirely new to me, significant influence. Karina, however, had not finished her manipulative schemes, nor had I. As that week drew to a close, my entire existence seemed inauthentic. I continued to report for work at the depot, consumed generic cereal in a borrowed basement dwelling, and received messages from Karina, who feigned benevolence. She never pleaded. Karina was incapable of begging. Instead, she engaged in negotiations, employing frigid, deliberate language. Let's approach this intelligently. We can spare ourselves a protracted process. Consider the media. The media? As if anyone in the world cared about a man who'd once repaired his neighbor's clothes dryer for some leftover barbecue. However, it seemed someone was indeed observing, for by Friday, I received a phone call from one of Glen's estate lawyers. It wasn't the individual from the will's reading, but a younger voice, sounding strained and apprehensive. He inquired if I could visit to examine additional papers. I confessed my confusion. He clarified that it pertained to the organization of the legacy. "You'll undoubtedly wish to peruse this personally," he added. The law firm was situated in a glass-clad skyscraper downtown, precisely the sort of establishment I'd often walk past en route to my inexpensive midday meals, always presuming I had no business being within. The receptionist didn't even bother to glance up. I settled onto a leather sofa, its price tag undoubtedly exceeding that of my initial automobile, perspiration soaking through my shirt as I cautiously avoided contact with anything. Upon entering the conference room, I was presented with a sealed dossier before they discreetly exited, affording me solitude. I unsealed it deliberately. My name, prominently bolded, appeared on the initial page. My gaze drifted over the contents, struggling to comprehend the bulk of the legal terminology, until I arrived at the segment titled Addendum, Conditions of Inheritance. It transpired that Glen wasn't merely resentful. He possessed a cunning theatrical malevolence. His fortune wasn't simply bequeathed to me. It arrived with specific directives. A significant portion of the inheritance, close to 40%, was allocated to a time-locked trust in my name. Yet here was the crucial stipulation. This sum would only become accessible if I maintained my divorce from Karina for a minimum of 18 consecutive months. Should I ever rekindle a romantic involvement with her, whether through marriage or otherwise, I would relinquish that entire amount to, astonishingly, a sanctuary dedicated to neglected canines. I reread the paragraph 3 times, each instance eliciting a more pronounced gasp. Glen had, without exaggeration, crafted a provision explicitly designed to penalize me should I ever reconcile with her. This wasn't merely about finances. It was an elaborate snare, a posthumous fidelity challenge. Furthermore, he had appended a handwritten, scanned note to the concluding page. Wendell, if the urge arises to re-enter the confines, recall that you were never the subservient one. She merely understood how to sustain you. Do not permit her to tether you once more. GD. The message was simultaneously enraging and strangely eloquent. The very man who previously ridiculed my efforts at folding his daughter's clothes had now, from beyond the grave, deemed me deserving of liberty and wealth. My sole requirement was to maintain distance from her. Gratitude or even relief should have been my predominant emotions. Instead, I was overcome with nausea. For Karina had resurfaced, attempting to draw me back into her orbit. This time, the stakes transcended mere treachery or emotional pain. It revolved around manipulation, intricate strategy, and absolute dominance. She remained unaltered. Simply, she was trapped. That evening, I ignored her call. She left a voice message, which I left unheard. The following morning, I discovered her parked outside my cousin's residence. Once more, the familiar vehicle and coat were present, but this time, no folder. Only she, with bloodshot eyes and disheveled hair, appeared almost vulnerable. I merely wish to converse, she stated. You always do, I countered. Her gaze dropped to her hands before lifting again. You've reviewed the paperwork, haven't you? I offered no response. Her jaw visibly clenched. It's utterly demeaning, Wendell. What he inflicted upon me, upon us, that provision, it's farcical. It's repugnant. He's mocking us from his tomb. Are you certain he's not solely mocking you? I interjected, an unintended chill in my tone, sharper than I had anticipated. She blinked, The first subtle sign of vulnerability. "I didn't intend to cause you pain," she murmured. But I emitted a sharp, weary laugh. "Didn't intend to? Karina, you initiated the divorce proceedings before his remains had even cooled. I was merely expected to give in while you amassed the funds and acquired the man in the distinctive blue footwear." She appeared on the verge of tears, yet no tears fell. And then a chilling realization struck me. She was incapable, not from pride, but from an utter absence of genuine feeling. Perhaps it had never existed. Before her departure, she attempted one final gesture. She reached into her coat pocket and retrieved a picture. It was a relic from our nascent period, a lakeside picnic, complete with disposable wine cups, her head resting on my chest. She clutched it delicately between two fingers, as if it held profound significance. "This remains with me," she stated. "You were more than a mere stepping stone, Wendell." But I declined the photograph. It remained on the stoop long after her departure. That night, I researched the animal sanctuary mentioned earlier. It was housing more than 300 rescued canines. One of them was named Captain Pickles. If I accepted her terms, my funds would be allocated to Captain Pickles. I had no desire for my personal value to be represented by a lazy-eyed pug. Yet, somehow in that very moment, I comprehended the entire situation. Karina's objective extended beyond merely regaining my affection. She was trying to deactivate the explosive device her father had set in motion. But the timer was already counting down, and I refused to suffer defeat again. The photo remained on the porch for 2 days. The first evening brought a gentle rain, a mere mist, enough to distort its borders and obscure my facial contours. I had assumed my cousin's child had retrieved it. But when I stepped out for work that Monday morning, there it was, still adhering to the wooden surface, its edges shriveled, as if 2 decades had passed in a single night. I retrieved it, not out of desire, but from a necessity for a potent reminder, not of our shared past, but of her immense sacrifice. You'd think this was the point where matters would settle, right? Where Karina would accept her defeat, retreating to some palatial residence adorned with polished stone, allowing me to revel in my unexpected windfall. But you'd be wrong. Karina was never one to concede silently, especially not to someone like me. 3 days subsequent to this, I received an unmarked envelope in my mailbox. It had simply been placed there. My name, emblazoned in crimson ink on its face, appeared audacious, ostentatious, and overtly staged, as if someone strove excessively to project an air of enigma. Within lay a solitary sheet of paper, devoid of letterhead or elaboration, bearing only 2 statements. There exist truths unknown to you, Wendell. Exercise caution concerning those to whom you entrust Glen's confidential matters. It was unsigned. Initially, I dismissed it as a jest. Then I considered the possibility of Karina engaging in psychological warfare, aiming to loosen my hold on the legacy. But the more I stared at it, the more I perceived that the tenor was inconsistent with hers. Karina did not issue warnings. She issued commands. That night, I spent meticulously examining every folder, email, and document provided by the attorney. I had left most of it untouched. Honestly, I was still daunted by the immense quantity of financial terminology. But now I delved deep, searching for any clue, anything that might elucidate the communication. And I found it. It wasn't presented on official stationery, nor was it couched in convoluted legal phraseology. It was found discreetly placed at the rear of a sealed envelope titled Miscellaneous Correspondence. Inside were several printed electronic messages originating from Glen's personal server. The majority were unremarkable: memos to his assistant, directives for his personnel. However, a specific email chain arrested my focus. Its subject line stated, "Regarding Karina's request." An indication of urgency was appended. I proceeded to open it. It was authored by an individual named Whitley. The email was concise, almost clinical. "We have processed the petition. The annihilation of documents mandates written authorization from all designated trustees as per the initial covenant. Presently, only a solitary endorsement has been acquired. Progression is halted without the second." Initially, the concepts of document obliteration and trustees eluded me, but the timestamp indicated it was only 2 weeks prior to Glen's demise. I navigated back to the preceding message in the sequence, and it was then that a gasp escaped me. Karina had sought the erasure, not merely the destruction, of a specific document designated Addendum C, Disqualification Clause. One needed no legal expertise to deduce its implications. I had copies of the emails produced and contacted Glen's legal counsel the following dawn. When I informed him of my discovery, a silence fell. It wasn't prolonged, just enough to convey his unexpectedness at my finding it. "Mr. Carr," he carefully articulated, "those documents were examined after Mr. Darby's demise. The provision was deemed valid. As you're aware, no modifications to the will were executed subsequent to his final notarized amendment." "So, she attempted to have the clause rescinded," I murmured, almost to myself. "She initiated contact, yes, but legally, nothing changed." I disconnected the call and remained seated, gazing intently at the wall for a considerable duration. Karina's departure wasn't merely abandonment. She had been privy to the clause. She understood her father's actions and had sought to nullify it prior to his death. That photograph she delivered, her visit to my workplace, the sudden gentle tone, the sentimental reminiscence, the feigned sorrow, this wasn't merely manipulative. It was a concerted effort at damage control. Later that evening, I received another voice message from her. She remained unaware I had uncovered the electronic correspondence, yet her tone had become more strained. Though still measured, it possessed a certain fragility. She was clearly losing ground, and she recognized it. "Wendell, please. I acknowledge this situation has grown unpleasant, but we both understand his actions were designed to inflict pain upon me. You are merely a temporary occupant. I am the one who endured a lifetime beneath his strictures. I am entitled to a portion of this inheritance. Surely, you don't truly wish to inflict such retribution upon me." I replayed the message twice, subsequently preserving it. Not out of a need for evidence, but rather to retain a precise recollection of her true character when she believed herself unheard. However, Karina remained oblivious, and Glen likely intended for me to uncover the truth, that the trail extended far beyond mere electronic messages. Other evidence included video recordings, surveillance camera captures, safeguarded archives, recorded visits to his property, and a solitary file marked July 10th, 3 days prior to his demise, bearing the title Library. I was unaware the estate even possessed a library. Yet, it seemed this was the locale where the ultimate revelation awaited. And Karina, for her part, had no inkling I was on the verge of its discovery. Should you have ever entered a chamber utterly devoid of warmth, you would grasp the sensation of stepping into Glen Darby's personal library. It required almost 7 days of phone conversations, bureaucratic procedures, and awaiting approval from the estate's administrator before access to the premises was finally granted once more. I had anticipated being halted at the entrance, informed of a change of heart, that I was mistaken, that the inheritance was not in fact mine, and that I would revert to my former anonymity. Yet the security personnel now acknowledged me, not as Karina's former partner, nor as the disheartened fellow who mended heating units. No, I was now Mr. Carr, the exclusive recipient of the Derby fortune, and it seemed even the stone lion statues flanking the main entrance appeared to straighten slightly upon one's arrival, bearing such a designation. The library occupied the upper level of the West Wing, an area I had never been permitted to enter during my visits with Karina. She had asserted it was inaccessible, citing private records and familial chronicles I supposedly wouldn't comprehend. Now, clarity dawned. Its essence wasn't literary. It was about dominance. For concealed between venerable leather-bound first editions and an antiquated globe, seemingly untouched for half a century, lay a hidden compartment behind a deceptive panel. My discovery was not solitary. Horace, an elderly member of the estate's personnel, directed me to the spot. His words were sparse. He simply presented me with a brass key, stating that he wished you to view it. Contained within the compartment was a solitary USB drive, nestled in a velvet-lined case, bearing Glen's own inscription, Library, July 10th, Final Record. Its weight seems disproportionate, as if it comprised more than mere plastic and metal, but rather held the complete compilation of truths I had failed to perceive over the preceding years. I viewed the contents in solitude, within the estate's study, the drapes drawn and the entryways secured. The recording lasted less than 5 minutes. Devoid of musical accompaniment or special effects, it presented unedited video captured by a stationary surveillance camera situated above the library's fireplace. The footage depicted Karina, neither weeping nor grieving, nor even by herself. She paced restlessly, clearly distraught, her mobile device gripped in one hand while the other gestured erratically. Her conversation was not directed at Glen. He sat unmoving behind the desk, observing. His visage conveyed not sorrow, but profound weariness. I drew closer. "You've no right to act this way," Karina sharply retorted. "Do you truly wish to face death with a grin, fully aware you've stripped me of everything?" Glen offered no reply. "Your animosity toward me runs so deep, you'd rather bestow your entire fortune upon a man who merely cleared your plumbing?" Still, silence persisted. She advanced, her voice escalating. "He's feeble, Father. He has no place in this realm. He's not even kindred. He struggles even with basic self-care. It's utterly mortifying." Glen at last stirred, a subtle lean forward. "Your choice was made," he uttered, his voice chilling. "You forsook him even before my departure." "And what of it?" she spat. "You were practically deceased." He raised a hand, effectively silencing her. "Nevertheless, I persisted long enough to alter my will," he declared. Karina froze. Her countenance, typically placid, contorted into a mask of near dread. His pace now deliberate, he continued. "You imagined you could outwit me, secure your liberty, hold on to the riches, and abolish the repercussions. But Karina, repercussions exist. You've always perceived love as a means of control. But Wendell, he never requested a single thing, never accepted a penny, never uttered a disparaging word, even when I endeavored to drive him off. Incorrect, Glen stated. It is about preservation. I am guarding my heritage from you. And then the recording ceased. I remained seated for a considerable duration, the darkened screen faintly mirroring my own visage in its faint glow. It brought no sense of closure. This wasn't some grand movie ending where the antagonist is revealed and divine retribution descends. No, it pained me. The whole experience was painful, as I had secretly harbored a lingering hope that she might still have feelings, that some fragment of her, however minuscule, had once held affection for me. But her tone when discussing me, as if I were an inconvenient mistake, was undeniable. She hadn't mislaid me. She had simply thrown me away. And now, her singular objective was the very thing I had fortuitously come into possession of. What her father had bestowed upon me, not from vindictiveness, but from acknowledgement. Yet a truth dawned upon me in that frigid, dim room, a predicament Karina had never foreseen. Beyond merely forfeiting the assets, she had alienated the only person who might have advocated for her, because the folders contained an item I had failed to observe earlier. Concealed amongst the official papers, emails, and property titles, a medical dossier, and an enclosed, sealed missive marked private for posthumous reading. And within it, a conclusive instruction from Glen, which not only barred Karina from her inheritance, but subtly suggested she had done more than just scheme and fabricate. It implied she might have expedited matters. I can't recall how long I sat, holding that package. I didn't break the seal immediately. My fingers quivered around its perimeter, as if the accursed thing might attack if I dared to peek inside. I've always struggled with the unknown. I'm the sort who searches for movie spoilers halfway through, just to lessen the anxiety. Yet this was no mere narrative turn I had been expecting. This was genuine, authenticated by Glen's initials on its wax seal. It was neither extensive nor theatrical, unlike the footage. Merely a single sheet, penned in meticulous block script. Glen's handiwork was strikingly precise, almost automated, as though each word had been meticulously gauged and etched with a sharp instrument. That specific phrase, that lone declaration, felt like liquid ice coursing through my blood. I lack concrete evidence, merely intuition. I was in good health before the retreat. My physicians affirmed this. But after her weekend visit, something shifted. I experienced chest discomfort and dizzy spells. She offered me a novel blend of tea, claiming it was for a cleanse. I never touched it again after I became violently ill the first evening. Yet I disclosed nothing to anyone. What sort of father would suspect his own daughter of trying to expedite the inheritance? But Wendell, if you're reading this, and I wasn't a peaceful departure, promise me one thing. Ensure she faces consequences. I placed the document down and gazed intently at the wood grain of the desk for an extended period. This was no formal charge, neither legally nor officially. Merely a suspicion. A faint hint from someone who had dedicated his life to assessing individuals. I tried to convince myself it was simply paranoia. That Glen, despite his intellect, had allowed sorrow to cloud his perception. But my intuition suggested the opposite. The memory of Karina in that video muttering about seizing everything. Her fixation on the claws, the desperation in her gaze, her repeated appearances feigning contrition. A distinct pattern began to emerge from it all, and therein lay the genesis of my recollection regarding the access controls. Horace had shown me the server terminal for a fleeting moment, an insignificant detail during the tour. Those records, however, meticulously noted entries into each room and at what time. I hurried back down to the lower level and requested renewed access to them. He paused, but when I presented him with the letter, his countenance grew stern, and he gave a simple nod. We retrieved the archive data for the weekend, as Glen had specified. Karina had accessed the kitchen on 6 occasions, the guest room twice, the library once, and Glen's personal chambers, 7 separate entries, all occurring between 12 a.m. and 4 a.m. 7. When I inquired about the usual frequency of guest access to that particular area, Horace responded unequivocally, never unless invited. And therein lay the crux. I was familiar with Glen's habits. He wouldn't have invited Karina into that chamber in the dead of night, not 7 times. Nevertheless, it did not constitute irrefutable proof. Insufficient for law enforcement, inadequate for legal action, yet it sufficed for my comprehension. Sufficient to grasp that her actions subsequent to the funeral were not born of sorrow or bereavement, but of dread. Not the fear of financial deprivation, but the apprehension that I might uncover her complicity in the premature acquisition of the funds. It was a perfumed, lipstick-adorned fear, masked by strained smiles. Thus, I reached a decision. I telephoned her. She answered instantly, her voice tinged with breathlessness, as if she'd been fixated on the device for an extended duration. Wendell, I stated, I found the footage, the one from the library and the letter. A stillness followed. I allowed it to linger. Then, in a hushed tone, she uttered, "You're not meant to possess that." "No," I confirmed, "I am not. Just as you were not permitted to be in his room 7 separate times past midnight." She emitted a sharp exhalation. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying, and so do you." A further silence. Then, with that familiar, unnerving self-possession she deployed when pushed into a corner, she cautiously inquired, "What do you want?" For the first time, she dropped all pretense of innocence. It was then that a revelation struck me. Karina possessed no belief in culpability, personal disgrace, or familial bonds. Her conviction lay solely in influence. Thus, I offered her none, absolutely nothing. I said, "I desire nothing from you, and I shall reciprocate with nothing in return. No funds, no complicity, no shield. You will spend the coming year perpetually questioning if I will approach law enforcement. You will maintain your immaculate coiffure and your gleaming smiles, yet you will invariably recoil at the sound of a doorbell." Her voice then fractured. "Genuinely, Wendell." But I disconnected the call. Never before in my life had I experienced such profound strength. My task, however, was far from complete, for Glen had bequeathed to me not merely an inheritance, but a formidable weapon. I had never harbored aspirations of becoming a millionaire. I had never envisioned myself in a courtroom half a year after my wife's departure, listening to legal counsel debate the minutiae of tea bags, access records, and testamentary provisions. It had been beyond my wildest dreams that I would remain resolute as Karina, perpetually poised and flawless, ultimately disintegrated before a judge, a jury, and an assembly of hushed observers. But life, as Glen would say, has an exquisite taste for irony. I did not immediately contact law enforcement following that telephone conversation. I proceeded deliberately, undertaking actions Karina would never have anticipated. My movements were cautious. I permitted her to believe I was merely feigning intent. I allowed her to privately succumb to panic within her luxurious glass condominium, accompanied by her wine and her financial ledgers, while she nervously monitored her phone as if it were a ticking time bomb. I initiated an investigation. I engaged Glen's long-standing personal investigator, a man who had worked for the Darby family for many years. It emerged he harbored prior doubts about Karina's conduct. He meticulously amassed a collection of notes, specific dates, records from pharmacies, and various financial movements. A subtle, yet irrefutable trail emerged, revealing Karina's acquisition of particular substances from a specialized health store renowned for its detoxifying powders, the very same compounds Glen had ingested before abruptly ceasing their use. Upon presenting this information to the estate lawyers, the legal mechanism activated swiftly and discreetly. Karina received official charges alleging her attempted manipulation of a trust, the obliteration of safeguarded legal papers, and her meddling with a will. No criminal proceedings were initiated. Our aim wasn't her conviction. Instead, the case advanced to civil court. Within that judicial setting, the immense influence of Glen Darby's legacy utterly extinguished Karina's last vestiges of hope. The contested stipulation remained valid. She entered believing she could challenge the outcome, but departed utterly destitute, without a single penny. The presiding judge respected the foundational framework of the trust, acknowledging the addendum, the visual recordings, and even Glen's personal written declaration. Karina's residual interest was immediately frozen, subsequently being lawfully diverted, not into my possession, but towards various charitable organizations Glen had designated as fallback beneficiaries in instances of ethical misconduct among family members. She attempted to dispute the ruling, filing 2 appeals. However, on both occasions, the tribunal consistently favored the presented evidence, endorsing the departed patriarch's wishes and validating the perspective of the devastated spouse who had maintained silence for far too long. As for myself, I refrained from extravagant purchases like yachts or relocating to Paris to employ a private chef. Instead, I settled into a humble residence by an upstate lake, welcoming 2 older rescue dogs from Captain Pickle's sanctuary into my home, and began dedicating my time to volunteering there weekly. It's quite ironic how a single provision, originally conceived from animosity, ultimately led me to the sole tranquil haven I've ever experienced. I've acquired knowledge I never realized was essential, such as navigating estate tax filings, gradually rebuilding trust, and finally sleeping through the night without checking my phone, anxious about her communications with others. Individuals often inquire whether I harbor resentment or if I still long for her presence. My honest response is, I truly don't know. I certainly don't yearn for the deceit, nor do I miss the burden of her demands. Occasionally, however, I find myself longing for the person I believed her to be, that iteration of Karina I once pictured, who, I hoped, still held affection for me beneath layers of ambition and disdain. Yet, to mourn a phantom is not synonymous with desiring its return. Recently, I received a letter, It was handwritten, quite untidy, and simply signed. There was no sender's address. Inside, it contained only a single sentence. You ruined everything. I chose not to retain it. Instead, I allowed my dogs to destroy it because her assertion is false. I did not ruin everything. What I did was preserve what remained of myself. And that, in itself, possessed a value far exceeding $250 million.